So Season 5 of Diablo 4 is right around the corner, and one of the big changes coming with this season is a complete rebalancing of pretty much every unique item in the game. Because with Season 4, we got all of the new crafting systems, one of the biggest ones being the tempering system, and you're not able to temper onto unique items. So in Season 4, every unique became much less powerful, and that's one of the big things they're targeting with Season 5, to rebalance and to buff up every single unique in the game. Now, we still don't have the full patch notes for Season 5 where we'll be able to see all of the unique changes, but we have gotten a look at a handful of these uniques, how they're changing, and that's the main thing I want to go over in this video. Now, the most recent bit of information we got was an officially released video that goes over some of the stuff coming with Season 5, and in that video we got a look at the new Harland Crest. And this is really interesting because I don't know if it was ever confirmed that all of the Uber uniques would also be getting reworked. And this new version of the Harland Crest seems to be quite a bit stronger, even though it's still basically the same thing. So they didn't touch the special effect, which is still 20% damage reduction and plus 4 ranks to all skills. So that's still intact, that hasn't been changed at all. But the affix rolls on this item have been pretty heavily changed. And these stat numbers are comparing a 925 to a 925. So first off, the max life has been increased from right around 1500 to a little over 1800, which is pretty massive. Base life increases are absurd, especially because of how many percent increases you get to your max life. So that's absolutely massive. The cooldown reduction has gone from 7% all the way up to 20%. And this means if you got a god rolled Harland Crest with a greater affix and you got all of your upgrade rolls on it, you could get close to 60% cooldown reduction on one item, which is absurd. Now that's incredibly rare, but the fact that that's possible is crazy. Now the two other stats have been changed. So normally the Harland Crest comes with a 12% resource generation and 28 to all stats. Both of those have been removed, and instead it now has plus 18 to max resource, which compared to resource generation, it can be good in some builds or it can be worse in some other builds. So that's kind of neutral, but they removed the all stats and instead added 2500 armor. Now I think this is actually a massive buff to this item, because 28 to all stats is already not that big. The only reason you would care about all stats is getting the secondary effect of rare nodes in your Paragon boards, which was already heavily nerfed in terms of how many stats you actually need for those. So all stats was basically useless, but now you get 2500 armor at a base. That's before upgrading the item and possibly having like greater affix rolls on that. So that's a massive amount of armor. And the reason this is so good is because pretty much every build in the game needs at least 1 or 2 armor rolls, whether it be a flat armor roll or a percent armor roll. But now once you get Harland Crest, which is pretty much best in slot for any build that can use it, now you won't need an armor roll on another item. So this basically frees up an affix roll on some of your other pieces of gear or frees up a tempering roll. So I think overall this item is going to be stronger. Now past that bit of information, we also got to look at a handful of unique overhauls we're going to be getting with Season 5. Now these all come from a handful of Diablo content creators that were basically part of a roundtable with a lot of the Diablo 4 developers, and the D4 devs allowed them to release some information. So there was a handful of content creators that all released the same information. I'll have a link in the description to the specific Wowhead post I looked over when looking at this information. So first off, we get a look at a few of the general uniques that are getting changed. And first off, we have Frostburn. So Frostburn is now going to have up to a 8% lucky hit chance, up to a 15% increase attack speed, up to 182% fire and cold damage increase, and then it'll have 2 lucky hits, which are up to a 40% chance to deal up to 4000 cold and fire damage. And then the special effect of Frostburn got massively buffed, so now it's up to a 60% chance to freeze enemies for 3 seconds on a lucky hit. This used to only be up to 25%. And also for the rest of these items, just so the video isn't super long, I'm not going to be going going over every stat the item used to have. I'm primarily just going to be going over what it has now, but in the Wowhead article linked in the description, you can also very easily look at the different stats in the article much more easily if you want to check what it used to have. But then we have a flicker step. Now, one of the big changes to this is the inherent, or what a lot of people know as the implicit, so the base roll the item type has actually gotten a massive change, and it seems to now have 2 of those instead of normally having 1. So it has the attacks reduce your evade cooldown by 2.5 seconds, which is a big buff. I think it used to be 1.5. And then it also has evade grants 30% move speed for 1.5 seconds. So now it's basically getting the implicit of 2 pairs of boots on this one item. So that's a pretty big buff. But then for its affix rolls, it has up to 18% movement speed, which is a slight buff. It has up to 300% ultimate damage, which is a massive buff. It has up to a 60% lightning resist and up to a 12.5% damage reduction from close enemies. Now, I think this item overall is getting a decent buff, especially with getting those 2 implicits. But if you're a build that doesn't use an ultimate for damage, I think this item is basically the exact same, because the main thing that got buffed besides having the other implicit is that the ultimate damage is massive now. It used to only go up to like 52%. Now it goes up to 300%. So if you're looking for more ultimate damage, Flicker Step is definitely getting a big buff. But then finally, for the general uniques, we have Fists of Fate. This got basically a full rework for its affixes and now has up to a 8.7% attack speed, up to a 8.7% crit strike chance, and the big change is it now has up to a 51.8% lucky hit chance. So pretty much any lucky hit or any build that uses a lucky hit can get a massive buff with this roll. And that's just at a base. You could also get a greater affix on that. You could also upgrade this item and get a bunch of the big upgrades on this. So this is absolutely absurd. And Fist of Fate used to just have 4 low lucky hit chances that were all pretty bad, but now it has 2 of the best rolls that come on gloves with attack speed and crit, and a massive lucky hit roll. And the 4th affix is also really good, because the 4th affix is a lucky hit up to a 51% chance to apply a random crowd control effect for 2 seconds. So that's a really high lucky hit chance at a base, just being able to apply any CC, but then that's also going to be increased by the lucky hit chance roll on this. So now this thing's going to be CCing everything, going to have good affix rolls, and then massively increase all of your other lucky hit chances. So Fist of Fate, I think, is going to be used in a lot of builds. And then next up, we have some Barbarian uniques, starting with Fields of Crimson, which is the Rupture unique. Its inherent is being changed. It used to be 35% crit strike damage. Now it's 130% vulnerable damage. So that's actually going to be a pretty big buff, because most builds already apply vulnerable anyway. Then for its affixes, it rolls up to 270 strength, which is massive. Pretty much every weapon in the game for pretty much all builds want their main stat as one of the rolls. It has up to a 550% damage increase to bleeding enemies. And if you're using this, you're going to be using a build that has bleeding. So that's just an absurdly high damage increase. Then an up to 70% increase Rupture explosive size. So that's a really big roll. That's also just one of the tempering you could get on other items. So they're basically just giving this unique a lot of the tempering rolls you would normally want. And then up to a 25% cooldown reduction for Rupture. I think this is a really massive buff for this item, especially comparing it to the rolls it used to have. And then we have a Battle Trance, and its affixes are now up to 8% critical strike chance, up to 12.5% damage reduction from close enemies, up to 3 increased ranks to Frenzy, up to 6 increased ranks to Duelist. And then its special effect is increase Frenzy's max dex by 2, and while you have max Frenzy, your other skills deal up to 55% increased attack speed. This used to be up to 45%, so its special also got a pretty big buff to attack speed. And this item is seeming a lot better, especially based upon how much attack speed you're getting overall. And then finally, we have 100,000 steps. Its inherent is now evade grants 10% attack speed for 3 seconds, up to an 18% increased movement speed roll. And then it's giving increased movement speed per walking arsenal bonus. So you'll just be able to get some pretty massive movement speed increase with this. And then up to 105% increased damage to stunned enemies. And then up to a 60% increase to your ground stomp size. Again, it's seeming like they're trying to add a lot of the popular tempering affixes just to the uniques themselves. Then the special effect is after gaining the final damage bonus bonus from the Walking Arsenal key passive, you automatically cast Ground Stomp and gain up to 100 Fury. And this cannot happen more than once every 10 seconds. So this got some pretty big buffs. It used to only be up to 50 Fury, so double the possible Fury, and its cooldown was reduced from 15 to 10. So overall, a pretty massive buff for these. And then next up, we have the Druid, starting off with the Great Staff of the Crone. Now its affixes are now up to 100% critical strike damage increase, which is pretty big. Usually builds running the Great Staff of the Crone also have really high crit strike chance, so that's just going to be a massive damage increase. Then up to a 270% increased damage to close enemies. This used to be only up to a 47% increase, so this is another massive damage increase. Then it's gotten a new really unique affix, which Storm Strike chains up to 2 more targets. And this is really big because Storm Strike normally chains to 3 surrounding enemies. Now it's going to be to 2 additional enemies. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to scale because with Storm Strike normally the damage is reduced each time it chains. I'm not sure if these chains are also going to keep rolling with that, which would also mean these 2 additional chains are dealing a lot less damage than the other ones, or it might just chain 100% of the damage depending on how this actually works. But overall, that's really good. Builds running Great Staff of the Crone usually lack AoE damage. And then the final affix is up to 4 to basic skills. It used to be up to 6 only to Claw, but 4 to just basic skills is actually much stronger. And then for the special, which is Claw is now a Storm skill and also casts Storm Strike at up to 200% normal damage. It used to be up to 150% normal damage. So also a massive buff on the special as well. And this is something I'm actually pretty excited for. I think Stormclaw Druids are a really cool build and they haven't been super strong for a while. And I think this is a really good first start, massively buffing a lot of their damage and some of their AoE. And then next up we have Mad Wolf's Glee, and its affixes are up to a little over 1400 max life, which is pretty much a doubling of the max life roll, up to 15% werewolf attack speed increase, which is really good. This can help with tornado builds, it can help with Stormclaw Druid builds, and pretty much any other build that's in werewolf a lot of the time, this can help a lot with. Then it has up to a 17.5% increase to the Lupine Ferocity's damage bonus. Now this is actually really unique. So Lupine Ferocity is one of our capstones where every third werewolf skill critically hits and deals a 70% increased multiplicative damage. So massive damage increase, and that damage increase is doubled to 140% against injured enemies. When this procs, it deals massively increased damage, and this seems to be an increase to that multiplicative damage increase. So it seems that at a base, this would increase the multiplicative damage up to 87.5. And then you get up to 5 increased ranks to the movement speed increase while you're in werewolf. So you're just going to be faster. And then its special has been changed to werewolf form is now your true form, and you gain up to 5 ranks to all werewolf skills. This used to just be plus 3 ranks. So that's also another pretty big damage increase. So this is just buffs across the board for Mad Wolf's Glee. And then finally, we have Storm's Companion, which are the wolf-focused unique legs, which really aren't used. But it does seem wolf builds are actually going to be viable in Season 5. Now their first affix is up to a 25% increased attack speed for wolves, so that's pretty big. Up to an 85% lucky hit chance for a Pack Leader Spirit Boon. Now this is a Spirit Boon that's a lucky hit that has a chance to reset all of your companion skills. And I'm not sure if this is like an 85% increase to the 25%, or if this is just an 85% increase. If it's an 85% increase, this will basically just mean anytime you crit, your companion skills are just going to be reset, which could be absolutely crazy. And for a wolf build, this just means your wolf's constantly pouncing, dealing a lot more damage. Then up to a 17.5% damage reduction from close enemies. So again, really good. And then up to 5+ ranks to your wolves. So overall, this is a pretty massive buff to the damage of your wolves. And then next up, we have the Necromancer, starting with the Blood Artisan's chest piece. It now rolls up to 1259 max life, which is another pretty massive increase to the max life roll on this, which again is very strong. We have a roll of up to 135% increased damage for 4 seconds after picking up a Blood Orb. This is a massive increase. It used to only go up to 17.5% increase. Now it's up to 135, so just a a massive damage increase. Now blood orbs restore up to 12 spirit, which is a new affix, which is really good. And then up to 3 ranks to bone spirit. And then a special is when you pick up at least 3 blood orbs, a free bone spirit is spawned, dealing bonus damage based on your current life percent. And the roll range on this is 10 to 3 blood orbs, the lowest being 3 and the best roll being 3. It used to be 10 to 5. Overall, this chest piece is just getting buffs across the board, and I think we may see some bone spirit builds. Then next up, we have Howl from Above. Its affix rolls are up to 12.5% lucky hit chance, up to a 35% corpse attack speed. Then we have a new roll, Corpse Explosion, fears and slows enemies for up to 0.6 seconds, so adding a pretty big CC element to Corpse Explosion is massive. And then up to 4 ranks to Corpse Explosion as well. Pretty big buffs across the board. Corpse Explosion getting this constant CC effect is going to be really strong as well. And then a special, instead of detonating immediately, Corpse Explosion summons a volatile skeleton that charges at a random enemy and explodes, and Corpse Explosion damage is increased by up to 50%. That's a multiplicative. It used to only be up to 40%, so a pretty big damage increase as well. And then finally, we have Lidless Wall. Now, a pretty big change on this is the inherence that this shield gets. So it has 20% block chance, 60% blocked damage reduction, 80% main hand weapon damage, and those are all the rolls it used to have, but now it has 12.6% total armor instead of 700 thorns. Now this is massive because this means you probably won't need to get any other armor rolls because this item also has up to a 2900 armor roll. So if you're a Necromancer using this shield, you don't have to worry about armor past this item. Then it also has an up to 35% bone storm duration increase. This pretty much ensures you'll be able to have bone storm up 100% of the time, which is massive. Has up to an 8% cooldown reduction, and then up to a +2 to all bone skills. So bone build's gonna be really strong, getting massive buffs, and bone storm is gonna be really strong as well. And its special also got some changes. It's a lucky hit while you have an active bone storm. Hitting an enemy outside of a bone storm has up to a 45% chance to spawn an additional bone storm at their location. Each one of your active sacrifice bonuses increases the chance by 25% and the total number of bone storms by +1. Now the change to this is it used to be up to a 30% chance, now it's up to a 45% chance. And I'm really interested to see some bone storm builds with this. I think it's super cool just having 100% bone storm up and then just spawning a bunch of other bone storms on a bunch of enemies around you. I think that's really cool, and I think the buffs to this may make builds like that actually viable. And then next up we have the Rogue. Now we only have information on one of the uniques, but it does also say that Eyes in the Dark and the Saboteur Signet are both being changed. I'm not exactly sure why those are specified to being changed because pretty much every unique in the game is getting touched in some way. This may mean that those uniques are getting much bigger changes than some of the other uniques are getting. But the one unique we do have information on is Wind Force. Now first off, its inherent is being changed to 130% damage to crowd controlled enemies. This used to be 35% crit damage, so that can be pretty massive. That's a really big damage increase, but it is a bit more conditional than crit damage. Then its affixes are up to 18% increased movement speed. That's actually really cool that a weapon is giving you move speed, so this would just be a build that makes you absurdly fast. Then up to a 55% chance for Barrage to cast twice, again just adding in those popular tempering affixes onto the uniques, and pretty much everybody likes the affixes that can cause an ability to be cast twice. It's just really fun. Then we have up to +4 ranks to Barrage, and then up to 2 ranks of Malice. So just some pretty big increases to your main skill and then a pretty good passive. And then for its special, Barrage has up to a 50% chance to knock down enemies with each hit and deal double damage. And this effect used to only be up to a 40% chance. So again, another item that's getting pretty much a complete overhaul, but also just really big buffs overall. And then next up, we have the Sorceress, starting with the Staff of Lama-san. And first off, its inherent was changed. It used to be 40% damage over time. Now it's just 170% lightning damage, which is huge, massive damage increase. Then its affixes are up to 360 intelligence. Most weapons in the game for most builds, you now want your main stat as a roll. So just adding that to uniques is smart. Up to a 75% chance for charge bolts to cast twice. So again, just adding really popular tempering affixes to the item. Then it has up to a 45% resource cost reduction. That is absolutely absurd. I think just off that, I could definitely see some builds being used for this. And then up to 6-2+ ranks for charge bolts. Then its special is your cast of charge bolts have up to an 80% chance to be attracted to enemies and last 300% longer. This used to be up to a 60% chance. So every part of this weapon has been massively buffed. Besides the special effect of this is pretty much a complete overhaul to the staff, and it's just massive buffs. The staff seems pretty crazy now. And then next up we have a Fractured Winterglass, and its affix rolls up to 75% non-physical damage. This is a massive buff. It used to only be up to 26%. Then up to a 17.5% chance for Frozen Orb to cast twice. Again, massive roll, just adding tempering affixes that are popular onto the unique items. And also that just fits really well into this item and how this build works. Then conjuration cooldowns are reduced by up to 0.3 seconds when a Frozen Orb explodes. And that's going to be even stronger because now your Frozen Orbs can just cast twice. So synergies between the affixes on this item. And then finally up to +4 ranks to Conjuration Mastery, which is just a really good passive. And then for its special, casting a Frozen Orb has up to a 65% chance to spawn a random conjuration when it explodes, and then a lucky hit, your conjurations have up to a 90% chance to launch a Frozen Orb at nearby enemies. And both of these effects were buffed. The first part used to be up to 50%, now it's up to 65%. The second part, which is a lucky hit, used to only be up to 70%, now it's up to 90%. So this necklace is going to be absolutely absurd. This Frozen Orb build is going to be really cool. When this was first revealed for Season 4, it looked to be like one of the craziest, coolest items in the game, but then it ended up just not being as strong as you would want. But now they pretty much completely redid it to just make it exactly what you would want. Just spamming out Frozen Orbs, spawning conjurations that also have a high chance to spam out Frozen Orb. Gonna be absolutely ridiculous. And then finally, we have a Blue Rose, and its affixes are up to 11% critical strike chance, which is also a really high roll for crit strike chance on a ring, up to 170% cold damage, so just a big damage increase, up to 350% ice spike damage, which is crazy. That used to be 42%, and then up to a 35% chance for ice spikes to explode twice. So not exactly casting twice, but something quite similar. And then its special, damaging an enemy has up to a 30% chance to form an exploding ice spike, dealing some amount of base cold damage, triple this chance if the enemy is frozen. Now the change to the special is just an absurd buff to the base cold damage it would have been dealing. So this item also seems like it's going to be something that's going to be pretty crazy and pretty fun to use. But that's all the specific information we have on some of these uniques that are getting overhauled or just getting some pretty big buffs. Now keep in mind, pretty much every unique in the game is getting buffed or changed or overhauled in some way for Season 5. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.